So I think we all know that Prince is timeless, but it's also safe to say that some of his best stuff came out in the 80s. And I mean all of the 80s. Every year, every month, every day, every hour, Prince was creating something magical. And this year, 2024, being the 40th anniversary of 1984, I've been thinking a lot about that year, and it's got me thinking, was 1984 Prince's best year? I think if you're going to talk about Prince in 1984, you've got to start in 1983, because a lot of the stuff that happened in 84 started in 83. And there was a lot of stuff that happened in 83 also, but since the focus of this video is 1984, I'm only going to talk about the stuff in 83 that's relevant to the stuff in 84. Hopefully that all made sense. So in 1983, Prince's deal with his management company was up and they wanted him to re-sign, and Prince was like, "You want me to re-sign? Get me a movie deal." See, earlier that year, Michael Jackson had put out the Thriller music video, which was basically like a mini movie, and everyone was going crazy for it. So Prince had to outdo him. So the original screenplay was written by William Blinn, and it was based loosely on Prince's life. I mean, it's not exactly a biopic, but there is a lot of stuff in the movie that mirrors Prince's life. So obviously, Prince was feeding some of this information to Blinn.
I can say that a lot of it dealt with stuff that had happened or almost happened in his life.
William Blinn eventually left the project, which was titled Dreams. This was before it was Purple Rain. And Blinn left the project to go work on Fame, at which point Albert Magnoli was brought in to rework the script and direct the film. So at some point in 1983, Prince begins working on the bulk of the soundtrack. A couple of the songs had already been recorded a couple of years earlier, but the majority of it he starts working on in 1983. And so the next time Albert Magnoli sees Prince, he's like, "Hey Prince, were you able to write any songs for the soundtrack?" And according to Albert Magnoli, Prince presents him with over 100 songs.
Essentially, he had 100 songs fully produced.
And as much as it impressed Magnoli that Prince had come up with over 100 songs, they had to be realistic. So Prince had to sit down and take these 100 songs and pick the best of the best and start whittling it down from 100 to just 9 songs. And obviously, as Prince fans, we would love to know what a double or quadruple soundtrack album would have sounded like, but I think Prince knew what he was doing. I mean, let's be honest. Purple Rain is a perfect record, so I think we might be better off with just the 9 songs. In May of 1983, The Revolution, Vanity 6, and The Time all begin rehearsals and acting classes. On August 3rd, The Revolution makes their official debut at First Avenue, playing a benefit show for the Minneapolis Dance Theater. And at that show, it was also the debut of the songs Purple Rain and Let's Go Crazy, and they made a live recording of the show, and the recordings of Purple Rain and Let's Go Crazy actually made it onto the soundtrack for the movie. August 15th, recording sessions begin for the soundtrack at Sunset Sound Studios. Now, a large portion of the album was done here at Sunset Sound, but as I said, some songs were recorded a couple of years earlier, some stuff was recorded live at First Avenue, but a large portion of the album was worked on right here inside of this building. By August, Denise Matthews, also known as Vanity, either quit or was asked to leave the project, and her and Prince were no longer friends. And what this meant is that they no longer had a leading lady for the movie and no more Vanity 6. But by September, Patricia Cotero is hired and Prince renames her Apollonia. Prior to this, Patricia Cotero was a LA Rams cheerleader. She also had some acting credits, including Fantasy Island, Knight Rider, and Chips.
Just the way I taught you. Okay, yes ma'am.
Oh yeah, and she was also in that Eddie Money music video. Apollonia was replacing Vanity in the movie and also in the music group that was now known as Apollonia 6. November 1st, filming for Purple Rain begins in Minneapolis, and just 1 month later in December, filming wraps here in Los Angeles, where they came to do some pickup shots, but ended up filming a lot more than they had initially anticipated. A lot of that had to do with how cold it was in Minneapolis.
Gasoline froze during that period of time. That's how cold it was.
You might recognize this spot where I'm currently standing. It looks a little bit different, but Prince was standing right here on a little wooden dock looking into the water that's no longer here, but you can see this wheel in front of me in the movie. I actually have a video where I show all of the filming locations for Purple Rain in Los Angeles. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. So it's finally 1984, the year that we're actually here to talk about. And basically, Prince spends the first 4 months of 1984 here at Sunset Sound Studios. From January to April, he was locked inside of this building, creating the Ice Cream Castles album for the time, the Apollonia 6 record, and The Glamorous Life for Sheila E. Also during that time, he writes and records Sugar Walls for Sheena Easton. He recorded it on January 20th, and by January 22nd, he was already putting her vocals on it. And you know, I definitely take it for granted living here in Los Angeles, coming to Hollywood whenever I want, passing by this building all the time. I forget sometimes the magic that happened inside of this building. I mean, not just Prince, but to think about the fact that Prince spent so much time inside of this building, writing, recording, creating so much magic. I mean, it's unbelievable. May 16th, When Doves Cry is released with 17 Days as the B-side and becomes Prince's first #1 hit. So by June, Prince gets bored because he hasn't done anything in like the last 5 minutes, and he decides to put together another group, and he forms The Family with members of The Time and Susanna Melvoin. And this isn't even a group that Prince is gonna be in. It's just a side project, another way for him to release more music. And so originally, he wrote and recorded all of the songs all by himself. He then later recorded the songs with Eric Leeds on saxophone and then layered Paul and Susanna's vocals on top of his. And in case you didn't know, the Family album was the original official release of Nothing Compares to You. On June 4th, Sheila E.'s debut album, The Glamorous Life, is released, and it hits #7 on the R&B charts and #28 on the pop charts. And if you remember, this is one of the records that Prince spent the first 4 months of 1984 working on, and although it's credited to the Star Company, it's Prince that wrote and performed most of, if not all of the record. June 25th, about 1 month before the movie comes out, the Purple Rain album is released, and it's very well received by critics. Kurt Loder, who at the time was writing for Rolling Stone magazine, gave it very high praise and compared Prince to Jimi Hendrix. Kurt Loder said, "The spirit of Jimi Hendrix must surely be smiling down on Prince Rogers Nelson. Like Hendrix, Prince seems to have tapped into some extraterrestrial musical dimension where black and white styles are merely different aspects of the same funky thing." Ice Cream Castles by The Time is released, and it hits #24 on the pop charts and #3 on the R&B charts. Also in July, Let's Go Crazy is released as a single with Erotic City as the B-side, and it becomes Prince's second #1 hit. July 26, 1984, the premiere of Purple Rain took place right here at what was then known as the Mann's Chinese Theater. And it was a wild scene out here in front of the theater. You had screaming fans on either side. Right up there in the middle, there was a giant picture of Prince on his motorcycle. Out here in front, they had a purple carpet, and that's where all the limos were pulling up, dropping off the celebrities. And everybody was here. I mean, Eddie Murphy, Lionel Richie, John Cougar Mellencamp, Stevie Nicks, Little Richard, my personal favorite, Pee Wee Herman, right there in front. That's where Pee Wee's little car pulled up. And I was lucky enough to go to a Q&A with Paul Reubens, and someone asked him what one of his favorite moments of his career were. And he said that one of his most memorable moments of his entire career was going to the Purple Rain premiere because he was such a massive Prince fan. And that, of course, blew my mind when he said that. And he talked about how he remembered sitting in that little car in a parking structure that used to be located right down here at the corner of Hollywood and Highland. It's now just the mall, but there used to be a parking structure down there. And he said he sat in that little car for like an hour plus, waiting for them to give him the signal to go. And finally, a guy with a walkie-talkie told him that it was time to go. And he came right out here onto Hollywood Boulevard and pulled up in front of the theater. And of course, it was also right here, basically right where that minivan is, where Prince's purple limousine pulled up. And then Prince, along with Big Chick, got out and walked along the sidewalk past all of the screaming fans, and Prince made his way inside of the theater. So after the big premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater, they had the after party, which is something that Prince was known for throughout his entire career. They had that after party right here. It's now the Avalon, but to me, this will always be the Palace.
We are live at the Palace in Hollywood, and the party is happening.
Now, the whole thing was such a big deal, not just the premiere, but the after party as well. So much so that MTV covered it. I believe it was live on MTV.
We are absolutely live here.
But not Prince's performance. That took place much later, after midnight, after MTV was gone. But Prince did do a 40-minute performance that included 17 Days, When Doves Cry, and Irresistible. By August, Purple Rain replaces Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA at #1 on the Billboard charts and remains there for the next 24 weeks. In September, Sheena Easton releases the album A Private Heaven, featuring the song Sugar Walls. And although the song was fully written and performed by Prince, it's credited to Alexander Nevermind, which is one of Prince's many aliases. The song hit #9 on the Hot 100 and #3 on the R&B charts, and it's the jam. September 26, Purple Rain is released as a single with God as the B-side, and it peaks at #2 in the US. In October, rehearsals began for the Purple Rain tour, and at the same time, Prince recorded Condition of the Heart for Around the World in a Day. He also recorded an extended version of I Would Die For You, and supposedly that extended version was originally 30 minutes long. Also in October, the Apollonia 6 record dropped, and it hit #24 on the R&B charts. In November, the Purple Rain tour kicks off in Detroit with Sheila E. as the opening act. On November 28th, I Would Die For You is released as a single with Another Lonely Christmas as the B-side, and it peaks at #8. In December, Prince begins to work on Sheila E.'s second album, Romance 1600, and at the same time, he continues to write and record songs for his next album, Around the World in a Day, in studios all around the US, all while on tour. Unbelievable. Oh, and by the way, this lake right here behind me, this is Franklin Canyon Park Lake. I think that's what it's called, but this stood in as not Lake Minnetonka.
She would dive into the water in Minneapolis and reemerge weeks later in Los Angeles.
And so that's how 1984 ends, with Prince doing the big Purple Rain tour and at the same time writing and recording music for himself and for other artists. So the Purple Rain tour started in November 1984, but it didn't wrap up until April 7th, 1985. And then Prince's next album, Around the World in a Day, came out on April 22nd, just 15 days after the Purple Rain tour ended. So that means the entire time that he was on tour, he was writing songs and recording songs and putting the entire album together, and again at the same time writing songs for other artists as well. Whenever Prince had downtime to relax, he would spend it going to recording studios and making more music because he just couldn't stop. And don't forget, at the same time everything else was going on in 1984 that we just talked about, Prince was also making music videos and going to events and countless photo shoots, like this one for the Purple Rain album and movie poster. That photo shoot took place at the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank. So there is definitely no doubt that Prince dominated pop culture in 1984. Music, movies, TV, MTV, Prince was everywhere. But the question still remains, was 1984 Prince's best year? Was it commercially his biggest year? Yeah, probably. He had the movie, he had the soundtrack, he had the tour, he had 2 #1 hits, 5 songs total on the Billboard Hot 100. But was 1984 the best year for Prince music? Well, that's where it's probably going to depend on which Prince fan you ask. You've got Sign of the Times, which is personally my favorite album, and it's a double album that didn't come out until 1987. You've also got Parade, which came out a couple of years after Purple Rain. You've got Dirty Mind and 1999, which came out before Purple Rain. And so all of that is the reason why Prince is timeless. He was making amazing music all throughout the 80s and the 90s and after the 90s. Prince definitely was, is, and will always be the baddest to ever do it. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.